Can you recall the time when you started to speak English intelligibly and fluently? When was it? How would you describe the experience? This video tackles the stages of learner language development. The progression of learners' linguistic development may be described in many different ways. Indeed, learners are so variable in their acquisition of a second language that stages of development defy description. 4 stages of learner language development by quarter. First is random errors. Second, emergent. Third, systematic. And fourth, stabilization. The first stage is random errors. Quarter called this pre-systematic, in which the learner is only vaguely aware that there is some systematic order in a particular class of items. The written utterance, the different city is another one in the another two, surely comes out of random error stage, in which the learner is making rather wild guesses at what to write. Inconsistencies like John can sing, John can to sing, and John can singing, all said by the same learner within a short period of time, might indicate a stage of experimentation and inaccurate guessing. Stage 2 is the emergent stage. In this stage, the learner is growing in consistency in linguistic production. The learner has begun to discern a system and to internalize certain rules. This stage is characterized by some backsliding, in which the learner seems to have grasped a rule or principle and then regresses to some previous stage. This phenomenon of moving from a correct form to an incorrect form and then back to correctness is referred to as U-shaped learning. In general, the learner is still at this stage unable to correct errors when they are pointed out by someone else. Avoidance of structures and topics is typical. Consider the following conversation between a learner and a native speaker of English. Systematic stage. The learner is now able to manifest more consistency in producing the second language. While those rules that are stored in the learner's brain are still not all well formed, and some of them conform to the above-mentioned U-shaped processes, they are more internally self-consistent, and of course, they more closely approximate the target language system. The most salient difference between the second and third stage is the ability of learners to correct their errors when they are pointed out, even very subtly, to them. Consider the English learner who described a popular fishing resort area. Stage 4 is stabilization. Corden called this the post-systematic stage. Here, the learner has relatively few errors and has mastered the system to the point that fluency and intended meanings are not problematic. At this stage, the learner has the ability to self-correct. The system is complete enough that attention can be paid to those few errors that occur and corrections be made without waiting for feedback from someone else. It should be made clear that the 4 stages of systematicity outlined above do not describe a learner's total second language system. We will find it hard to assert, for example, that a learner is in an emergent stage globally for all of the linguistic subsystems of language. One might be in a second stage with respect to, say, the perfect tense system, and in the third or fourth stage when it comes to simple present and past tenses. Finally, we need to remember that production errors alone are inadequate measures of overall competence. Let us discuss variation in learner language. A great deal of attention has been given to the variation that learners manifest in their interlanguage development. Just as native speakers of a language fluctuate between expressions like "it has to be you" and "it must be you," learners also exhibit variation, sometimes within the parameters of acceptable norms, sometimes not. Some variation in learner language can be explained by what Gat-Bunton in 1983 described as the gradual diffusion of incorrect forms of language in emergent and systematic stages of development. First, incorrect forms coexist with correct forms. Then the incorrect forms are eradicated. Context and style have also been identified as a source of variation along with gender-based variation. In classrooms, the type of task can affect variation, and variation can be caused in both tutored and untutored learning by the extent to which a learner is exposed to norms. Notable among models of variability are Elaine Theron's Capability Continuum Paradigm and Rod Ellis's Variable Competence Model, both of which have inspired others to carry out research on the issue. In 2006, Theron conducted a study entitled Variability in Interlanguage Use, a study of style shifting in morphology and syntax. The study shows that the performance of second language learners on a written grammar test varies from their performance when attempting to communicate orally. In some cases, grammatical accuracy is much better in spontaneous oral communication than in scores on a written grammar test. There are 4 categories of variation. 1. Linguistic context. 2. Psychological processing factors. 3. Social context. And 4. Language function. The emphasis on context led researchers to look carefully at the conditions under which certain linguistic forms vary. For example, suppose a learner at one point in time says, "He must pay for the insurance," and at another time says, "He must pay the parking fee." An examination of the linguistic and conceptual context might explain the variation. In this case, sentence 1 was uttered in the context of describing an event in the past, and sentence 2 referred to the present moment. Thus, the apparent free variation of the main verb form in a modal auxiliary context is explained. One of the most fruitful areas of learner language research has focused on the variation that arises from the disparity between classroom contexts and natural situations outside language classes. Rod Ellis has drawn a more internal picture of the learner in his variable competence model. Drawing on Bialystok's earlier work, Ellis hypothesized a storehouse of variable interlanguage rules, depending on how automatic and how analyzed the rules are. He drew a sharp distinction between planned and unplanned discourse in order to examine variation. The former implies less automaticity, and therefore requires the learner to call upon a certain category of learner language rules, while the latter, more automatic production, predisposes the learner to dip into another set of rules.